Hello, everybody. This is Anthony Russo from WorkFusion, and I want to thank everybody for joining the RPA 2.0, the new operational model for scaling RPA and critical role of analytics webinar today on August 16th. So we're getting a few more people getting ready to join, so we're going to go through some housekeeping issues just first, and then we'll dive right into the webinar content. So just some housekeeping reminders. Again, want to welcome everybody. I want to thank everybody for taking the time today to go through. We've got a lot of really great content that we're going to present for you from an industry perspective and also on AI, robotics, and information. As far as just audio controls, just remember to make sure to mute your line so we don't have any noise or background information in there. So for the speakers. For questions, we will have a Q&A session at the end with both Craig LeClaire and the WorkFusion team. If you have a question during the session, please put it in chat so we can tabulate those and make sure that we address those in the Q&A session and afterwards if we run out of time at the end of the session. So please use the ReadyTalk conference controls to put them in chat, and we'll get to them during the Q&A session. If you have any tech issues with the webinar, with either audio or the visual piece, the best thing to do would be to close your browser and go back to the email invite and relaunch the webinar from there to review not only the slides but also the audio controls, because we do have a lot of people on the webinar today, plus depending on your internet connectivity issues. But we found that's the best way to resolve any issues with the webinar. All right, so moving on to our agenda. So there's three main sections that we're going to focus on today. One, we're going to have Craig LeClaire from Forrester talk to us about the emerging digital workforce and sort of his view from an analyst and an industry perspective on where that's going. And then we're going to switch over to RPA 2.0, where it is today, and some of the WorkFusion folks are going to get on and talk about how we're using that to our tools to enable RPA 2.0 and where that's going with our software from there. And then we'll dive into a Q&A session at the very end. So our speaker list today, we're really happy to have Craig LeClaire, VP and Principal Analyst for Forrester Research, one of the primary analysts in the AI and the RPA space. From WorkFusion, we've got Michael Abramczyk, who heads our product team here at WorkFusion, and myself, I'm Anthony Russo from the product marketing team. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Craig LeClaire to go ahead and start it on the emerging digital workforce. So Craig, go ahead and take it away.
Well, thank you, Anthony. I'm going to jump right in. We have a lot of content here, and I know so firstly, thank you for attending and giving us this time. I know that there's different levels of understanding probably in this group of, it looks like about 500. So I'm going to try to walk that bridge. But the topic obviously is RPA and some recent research we've just done on operating models. I'm going to start with a little bit of introduction on what we're seeing in the RPA market today. Take a look at some of the forecasts in relation to analytics, which is a big part of it, and then end with a best practices operating model that we've gleaned from talking to hundreds of different companies. All of this automation we're doing is really related to improving digital experiences for customers at the end of the day, or citizens if you're a government entity. So we've moved from designing products from the outside, from the inside out, in terms of how the core system wants to understand the product, how engineers in a particular faction of a company want to see it, and now with the movement towards the age of the customer and for digital transformation and so forth, we're now focused on how the customer views the product or service. So it's really about experiences and outcomes and desires. And the difference between those two is either being a digital prey and having your business marginalized over time, or being able to grab market share, or set up new business models. So RPA is one of the building blocks that enables this kind of more outside-in and digitally oriented view of the world. Putting it into perspective, in terms of a lot of the technologies that have been out there for years to help this transformation to a more digital experience, you see robotic process automation on this lower red line. So these lines, as you go up the scale in terms of the line, the technology area is adding more business value. So if you look at things like dynamic case management, it's on a top line because you're transforming a process. You're looking at new ways that work is done in a less structured way. RPA, you might ask, why is it on the red line? Why is it not providing the same business value as some of these others? Well, it's a wonderful technology. It hits very, very tactical pain points today, but it's not particularly transformative in terms of the customer experience because the assumption is you're leaving the existing process as is. So you're not redesigning from the outside in. You're taking the existing process that you have, using a very relatively simple, non-invasive technology to be able to really patch inefficiencies. So it doesn't quite have the transformative aspect of some of these other areas, but you can't really talk about RPA without putting in the context of technologies that have been around for decades. You have content management there. You have document generation and customer communications management. You have business process management, BPM and workflow, electronic forms. All of these have been trying to digitize. Many of them have scripts and macros and other enabling automations that really make them work. So RPA, I'll talk about why it's exciting now. Why is it gaining so much interest as we move forward here? But let me just talk about just a definition you always need. This is sort of Forrester's way we think about it. We introduced the terms attended and unattended because they were nicely confusing, and we like to just be confusing in new terms that we use. But really, if you think about it, attended is where the bot that you build with the RPA software is interacting with a human. So that's mostly associated with the agent world, the customer service, where you might have a agent sitting in a cubicle on the phone, going into an application and hitting a link that's actually kicking off a bot that's going to go off and update addresses in 6 different tables. So that's that interaction, that human-bot interaction, is associated with that attended world. Unattended is where you're looking at Harry or Sally that's sitting at that workstation, and you're saying, I'm going to build a bot that's essentially a batch process. Maybe it's running in a virtual machine in some data center, but it's going to take the keystrokes and mouse movements and the applications that Sally is interacting with, and it's going to replicate those in software. It's going to build a bot that does what Sally does. Sally can then go and do different and hopefully more exciting things. So unattended and attended is kind of a way to just distinguish the front office from the back office, if you will. And of course, like all distinctions, there are problems with it. There certainly are hybrid applications where you start out with maybe an attended interaction with the bot, but then move to more of a batch or unattended process to complete something. But that's basically just a good way to think about the different areas. You'll see that the product suites have and the services ecosystem that's evolving around RPA, they will have different specialization, in terms of attended and unattended. So why is this? I get asked a lot. Why is RPA different from BPM? I mean, isn't it just building scripts and macros? We've been doing that forever. Well, a couple things. One is that BPM has really gotten associated with large transformational projects. BPM is not only software, but it's also a discipline of how do you. It really comes from Six Sigma and a lot of process methodologies like value stream analysis and even customer journey mapping. You're looking at blowing up the existing process, doing it as is, doing a future state, doing a roadmap to get there. And a lot of those projects take a long time. They involve a lot of people, and really, frankly, have had somewhat sketchy success. So RPA is called non-invasive because you're interacting through the existing UI of the desktop. So you're not having to get involved with data integration or web services APIs. In fact, our numbers show about 80% of applications don't have APIs at all. So you're really creating a integration layer that is unique to applications running on existing desktops that gives you access to a lot of applications that otherwise would be hard to get. So it's a low-touch approach and complementary to BPM, because if you look at a traditional BPM process map, you might have queues. You do have queues, and those queues are getting utilized at some level, and you have workers, humans that are interacting with those queues and pulling work and getting jobs done. They have in baskets. Think of those humans as being just augmented or replaced by bots. So essentially, the BPM still controls the overall end-to-end process, but is able to interact with bots to make the whole process more efficient. Now, there are thousands of use cases for these bots and for RPA. I've just highlighted a few here. I'm going to go into a couple to give you a stronger flavor. But basically, what the bonus territory is here in this 2x2 is essentially the area where you can combine the execution value of these bots with some analytics to be able to make more intelligent decisions. So think of it like this. The bonus territory is where you have a office worker that you're now digitizing, so call it a digital worker, but that digital worker is not just doing simple decisions that are burned into that macro, but because you've integrated it with analytics, you're able to have more complicated decisions being made. You've made that digital worker a lot smarter. And that's where we think that RPA is going to go directionally. So that's where we encourage companies, when they look at all their use cases and they're trying to understand the profile for robotization, take a look at those that can have a potential linkage to the different phases of analytics growth, which I'll talk about in a minute. There are some areas that you have to tread carefully because they involve compliance and these bots do introduce some interesting aspects of change management, but also security. You're letting these bots operate within trusted boundaries within application space. You're opening up the door for potentially malicious behavior that you didn't have before, because you could, a bad employee could, program bots to do things, transfer some dollars to that account in the Cayman Islands. So there's some areas that you want to be careful as this technology matures. Let's take a look at some specific areas. This is probably RPA today is feasting on finance and accounting core systems like SAP and Oracle. These are areas that I've highlighted where I've seen from talking to companies where they're getting the highest FTE displacement. In other words, where RPA is replicating low-value human activity, and they're able to replace that human activity with bots. And you look at reconciliation, monthly and quarterly close. I talked to a large bank that had 1,800 employees working on that monthly and quarterly and annual close. They felt they could, with RPA, robotize, with bots, about 50% of that work in 2 years. Now, if you look at that process, they're in the most complex posting in that finance and accounting application. It was about 35 decisions that the human was making. But the average number of decisions being made across those 1,800 was 2.5 to 3. So the idea that you can use analytics to create a stronger decision making, where the decisions did not have to be statically programmed into the bot, and you could build a process knowledge base, use machine learning to be able to understand the decisions and do higher and higher order decisions, you start to see that you could create a digital worker that is much more capable than that initial low-hanging fruit that bots today can do. So that's a really good area right now. lots of areas, but this is just onboarding. This is when you onboard a commercial customer, a business, to a banking platform, the amount of data entry for Know Your Customer, for all of the different compliance reporting and collection requirements, the number of core systems you have to touch, systems of record, are vast. That's a perfect application for creating bots to do that. They can do it instantaneously. They can do it with greater reliability, fewer errors, and that's being done quite a bit as a use case. Let's just take a quick look at the market. The market's very, very strong right now. But because of, and again, I started off by putting RPA on that lower line in our tech radar, because it's really plugging gaps and inefficiencies in aging systems largely. It doesn't have a strong future, in that current role. Why? Well, systems are being modernized. We looked at that initial slide of outside in. The world is using methodologies like customer journey mapping to redesign and modernize systems. This is ongoing waves of changes that are inevitable. So the growth of RPA right now is dependent on legacy systems. Just take a look at on-demand communications, replacing human-driven fulfillment, the ability to have an event in a core system trigger the online delivery of a text message or an email. That's happening. That's replacing things that bots will do ultimately. Self-service and NLP interfaces, reducing RPA tasks. So as we move more and more to voice-first world, and you have chatbots coming in to replace humans in the call center, you're really replacing agents doing attended activities for RPA bots by having the customer do more and more. And as we will get there with NLP, conversational intelligence, and so forth. We're just beginning now. It's going to get better and better and better and better. So that reduces RPA too. So the key for RPA is really to climb this scale. So right now you see this lower stage 1. That's where RPA is today. This is what it's doing. It's not really doing screen scraping. That's old technology, that's very fragile, going in based on coordinates. Applications change too quickly today. So you're using more advanced analytics in most RPA solutions to understand the labels and attributes and objects, and really interact with those applications on the desktop in a much more sophisticated way. But you're doing some relatively simple workflow and task scheduling and so forth. They're basically sophisticated macros. Now, stage 2, and I'll go into these in some detail because this is where the confusion is. So, what is RPA? What's its relation to AI? Where's it going? Stage 2 is about unstructured content, really. So you look at it, the stage 2, you're analyzing unstructured data. Well, what is that? Well, that might be a mortgage document set. You might be looking at extracting entities with text mining or content analytics and looking at correlations, among the various extracted fields to understand whether there is a potential not in good order event that you're creating in the back office, which the bots can then, via their interaction, help you resolve, so it never gets to the back office. Okay, so that's very, very simple kind of more intelligent use of the technology. And I'll go into a little bit more detail structured in phase 2, because phase 2 is more than that. Phase 3 is the nirvana. Phase 3 is where you have very intelligent chatbots, conversational intelligence, natural language processing, working hand in hand with bots to get things done for customers. It's also, with that use case I talked about in finance and accounting, it's building a knowledge base that can make decisions and make that digital worker more intelligent based on machine learning, based on patterns that it's recognizing in the interactions it's doing, and being able to codify with supervised learning, so not automatically yet, but being able to adjust its models, its patterns, to be able to make decisions more intelligently. And that's really the 2 directions in phase 3 that bots can go for. So I'm going to give you a really confusing slide here. And this is really just to show you a little more detail on phase 2, which I think is where RPA is likely to go, is going right now. And I have a complicated process diagram here. This is something that you might have developed in a BPM solution. The point isn't about the flow. It's about that when you have a running process, you have some very valuable data that is emitted from that process. Call it empirical data from the running process. Now that data is very, very important because it can give you a lot of insight into the process. What are the repeating patterns for data entry and data management? Where are the bottlenecks? Where are the patterns where RPA can help? How do I optimize that human and computer interaction? I can understand from machine learning that this Sally, has done this particular set of mouse clicks and applications accessed, n number of times in a cycle. I can understand that can be robotized. Mining the unstructured content to drive bot actions, using basically this process intelligence to route and manage work. Think of traditional business process management and workflow. The routing for going from one step to another, you had to explicitly program. You had to have a skill defined in the system. You had to have some very simple logic, greater than 100, less than 100, that would indicate a routing to a different queue. Think of that routing and decision-making being moved to a machine learning environment where you have much more dynamic and the ability to learn and to improve the decision-making without explicit configuration in the tool itself. That's what we're talking about. We're talking about a layer of process analysis and metadata analysis using machine learning that can help you drive a much more intelligent digital worker. And as I talked about phase 3, phase 3 gets exciting because you start to employ all of the AI building blocks that we have. This is, Forrester makes a strong point that AI isn't one thing. It is in our view 13 things, and they're all different. They all come from different disciplines, and they are moving at different rates. You see deep learning here, which is in the nascent, in the early phase of the cycle here. The more mature technologies, you see robotic process automation, they're kind of in the center. But deep learning is wonderful in that you don't have to do all the data science to filter and cleanse and rework the data as you do with machine learning. That's been the real problem with machine learning. There's a lot of data work to get it into the machine. Deep learning can handle any kind of data. The problem is that it requires a tremendous amount of CPU and work to be able to process the data, and it's a little harder to understand because it's distributed in neural capability, what the audit trail is for the decision making. So there's issues with that, but the real future of the ultimate digital worker is going to be based on deep learning, which is really able to get to the time when we can start to compare human intelligence with a machine intelligence. And again, that's why that's way back here in the early creation stage. So phase 3 starts to embed these building blocks into RPA and we're seeing that content analytics, semantic technology, speech recognition, natural language generation and processing. These are all virtual agents. These are all capabilities that already today are starting to look to bots to kind of execute processes. This is an example of where customer service is trying to go. So think of this as the ultimate attended operation for RPA. The customer comes in and is through a chatbot, but gives up on the experience. It's just not happening. And fortunately has a link that says, "Get me a human," and right away. And the human addresses the problem, but the voice conversation is converted to text and ingested in the machine, and the machine's able to use various prioritization mechanisms called active learning, where you basically take interactions and you can score them, based on the ones that are most important. Then you can focus on those and say, I want the machine to learn how to deal with these capabilities. and the machine then becomes self-adjusted, really with supervision, with people going in with Python programming and being able to adjust models and algorithms and so forth. But the machine is able to learn based on the data to handle the increasingly hard exceptions that are coming in. So the machine is extending its support capability. This is what basically the world, the major mega cloud platform guys, Microsoft, Salesforce, Google, they're all working on building this kind of intelligence so that this will be the future of customer service. And RPA, as you see, there's a lot of things that get done in the background, and there's a digital workforce behind this interaction that's getting things done, and that's where RPA comes in. So I'm going to finish with just a sort of lofty thought, but it's an important one. When I do talks at conferences and webinars and so forth, I kind of realize that everybody I'm talking to is pretty fortunate. They're not in the working class. They're probably, the average IQ in America is around 97, I think. That's like 12th in the world. The IQ of probably the 642 on this call is probably around 120. So we're okay. And we're actually trying to do interesting and creative things with this technology to further our careers, make money for somebody or so forth, and that's all good. But we have a problem here in that the working class you see on the left that is in cubicles today, and you see the cubicles, we have 9.2 million in cubicles just in the U.S., and many of there are working in attended mode and some in unattended mode. They're either sales and related or office administrative. These are numbers from the National Bureau of Labor Statistics. They're going to get thrown out of these cubicles. We're going to have an attrition rate of about 16 million, as I think are for Forrester's numbers over the next 5 years due to RPA, digital worker, AI, these types of components. And they're not able, 90% of them are not going to be able to participate in the digital age jobs on the right. And that's a somewhat dystopian view, but I think it's a realistic view. So we're going to have a big change management issue where we're going to have a big skills issue with this whole area. So as we're doing this, we need to think not only of the beauty and the value of the technology, the opportunity for that technology to do great things. We need to think about the people. We need to think about where they're going to go, what they're going to do, and how we're going to manage that change in attitude that's going to be perceived as we start bringing these bots into the workforce. Some companies are naming them. They're naming them after their high performer, to make them more acceptable to the employees. But anyway, just a final note to think about the people as well. This is a very exciting area. It's a very exciting time, very exciting technology. But behind it all, there are people with jobs, families, aspirations, self-esteem, and so forth. So I'm going to just leave these slides for you because I'm went a little bit long on time. The market is strong, and I would focus on look at these slides on the RPA operating model. This is a paper that'll be out in a few weeks from Forrester. But you don't reduce the FTEs at the level you do with this technology without needing to support it. We have a heuristic here that looks at 10 to 15% of the displaced FTEs that are going to be needing to support RPA as it's running in an organization. 2/3 of those should be in the business. The design studio and so forth should be in the business. The business understands the process. They hired the human workers. They're going to manage the digital workers. About 1/3 of those FTEs belong in technology management, running the control tower, doing operations, and most importantly, maintaining a control framework. This is far too busy a slide. I'm leaving it for your edification after the call. But this is a 10-point framework that before a bot goes into production, that technology management should have control over, and look at these 10 areas that go into the process profile. Is it a good process? Security exposures I've mentioned, exception management issues, business continuity, infrastructure, operations and audit, so forth. You can read the slide. This is one of the challenges. 80% of the companies we talk to are in POC or early pilot with RPA. Very few are in any level of maturity. So there's a lot of angst and a lot of issues issues with how do I create a support model to run RPA at scale. And so these two slides I've just shown are really our first cut at really trying to understand that. So I want to thank you very much, and I'll turn it back over to Anthony.
Thank you, Craig.
Really appreciate all the insights. Now I want to turn it over to Michael Abramczyk from our product team, and he'll follow on with some of Craig's additional comments. So, Michael, I'll turn it over to you.
Sounds good. Thank you, Anthony, and thank you, Craig. I would like to pick up on Craig's thought about RPA Phase 2. There's an excellent point, Craig, you made here, that you need to apply machine learning to build and manage the digital workforce, and there are three pillars that your ability to execute relies on. The first one is optimize human-computer interaction. The second one is ability to mine unstructured content. And the third is use process intelligence to route and manage the work. At the same time, if we look at RPA's ability to automate and deal with change, it relies on the same three pillars. Again, same three, but let's take a closer look at what defines each. With RPA 1.0, you do automate data entry and screen scraping. You rely on people to manage bots and automate individual tasks. With RPA 2.0, you process unstructured data to extract key information. You have dynamic workload distribution that spreads the tasks to people and bots. And you use content analytics and automate at a process level. If we take it even further to RPA 3.0, you now have the cross-domain knowledge. You rely on cognitive computing to make decisions and optimize human-bot interactions. And you automate cross-processes. And in fact, with WorkFusion Intelligent Automation today, you get all three pillars up to level 2.0. Let me walk you through each one by one in details and elaborate on my thought. We now on the first one, which is mining unstructured data. And let's take a look what you could do with RPA 1.0. You could do a copy-paste bot to automate data move. And with RPA 2.0, you now get into different types of bots, which are far more complicated and need more capabilities in place. If you will, they are far more sophisticated processes. Now you can do reconciliation and data entry and far more, and you need to bring together RPA, AI, BPM, and OCR capabilities. Let's take a look at the second pillar, which was optimizing human-bot interaction. And again, with RPA 1.0, you could get a series of bots to automate your tasks. Let's take a simple example of a first notice of loss process, which is typical for insurance space. So you could have a robot that pulls OCR claims. You have a robot to perform data entry and automate forms. Then you skip part of the process and you do robot that correlates treatment with claim. And then you robotically approve based on certain rules. For example, if it's less than a certain amount. However, what happens in between is that process breaks, and when it breaks, you have to bring people in. And people execute their assignments outside of your automation, outside of the process, and they are still isolated from the bots. But with RPA 2.0, you bring it all together to a streamlined workflow that is able to hand over tasks between bots and people seamlessly. And this brings us to the third pillar, which now becomes possible due to the prior one. With RPA 1.0, tasks are just executed. It's either the first in, first out, or it's a human being who does the orchestration. But with RPA 2.0, the tasks are not just executed anymore, but tasks are routed to the right people, to right human being or right bots based on the smart algorithms. And now the machine knows who is the best suited for the given task at the given point of time, who has the capacity to execute it, and who is the best skilled to execute the task. Having such a routine in place demonstrates about 30% efficiency gain when applied to production level automation. Now with this thought in mind, I'd like to hand it over back to Anthony, who will bring a real world example, a case study for retail management, which brings all the described capabilities of RPA 2.0.
Thanks, Michael.
Anthony?
All right, I'll take everybody through. Yes, I'll take everybody through a case of RPA 2.0 that we've worked with at WorkFusion, where we've helped a retailer improve collection and automating data on a global scale to better report on their product performance. So just before we go through, there are three main pillars that make up the retail industry. There are the manufacturers who produce the products sold in the global locations. There's also the retailers who purchase stock and sell the goods. And then finally, there's the consumers who are obviously shopping for the retail goods in certain locations. So data from these sales for inventory, stocking, packaging, and other attributes are passed to the manufacturers and from the retailers and consumers and are collected to be analyzed to track. Is really what the manufacturers and retailers want to do, is track product performance. So just thinking from a retail measurement perspective, that retail measurement of products is complicated. If you think about certain products, they have multiple attributes and categorization, which makes it difficult to do this on a global scale. So just for example, in this slide, you think of a simple packaging piece. They have different items such as weight and size, health information, legal information, different packaging languages that all vary by region and country, which basically leads to retailers having a large localized data set that they have to manage. The other thing too is that if you wanted to use the phrase, all toothpaste is not created equal, that unfortunately retail data varies across different particular regions, so that you can actually have different product types in different regions or countries. That again makes it a challenge to manage this data across a global data set. So I want to give you a view into sort of how these retailers do it today on a manual set. So today, retailers have to take this data and information that they're getting in from all of their global retailers, and they have to manually enter this data into individual local data sets for all the regions and the countries that they have all around, which is not only time consuming but costly. And then take that manual data and push it into a simple global data set for all of those localized data sets to be able to report on performance out of that. So there's a couple things here to note. That one, it takes a significant amount of time if you have all these local data sets that have to be compiled individually at the country or the region level. And then actually processing all that data manually leads to potentially incomplete data or incomplete reporting. So you're really not getting the complete story from a reporting perspective. So how does WorkFusion RPA 2.0 fix this? So when you have the input of all of that data, what we're doing from a robotic standpoint is we're flipping the model, and that we're taking all of the data and putting it into a global data set. So we're starting the opposite way. We're taking all that localized data and using robotics and RPA to move it into a single global data set. Here with RPA 2.0, you can also manage exceptions very, very easily through human in the loop and other ways to feed back into the global data set to minimize the number of errors that you're going to have with your particular data. From there, you can also use RPA to automate the global data set, and now you're being able to report more accurately at a local data set level. So really, we're just flipping the model to be able to have a better reporting on a local data set level. You also have data and stats that will show you the accuracy of your data and almost how much of this process is actually automated. So again, it's a very big sort of step from the previous slide from a manual perspective. So this is just one way that we're helping retailers automate a lot of this data collection so they can report on their products in a way that's more efficient and more effective and can really help scale and improve their business. So from that example, I'm going to turn it back over to Michael to just to wrap up with some key thoughts and summaries.
Yep. Thank you, Anthony. First of all, I really wanted to thank you guys for finding the time to join our webinar, and I hope you enjoyed the content. If I were to summarize really quick what has been presented today, we went through 3 Phase 2 RPA capabilities which emerged to sustain the growth of technology. These are mining unstructured content to drive the bots, optimizing human-bot interaction, using process intelligence to route and manage work. They are crucial capabilities, pillars we call them, to not only sustain the growth, but also make sure that you automate more effectively and you can gain most of RPA technology today. With RPA 2.0, you use intelligence to deal with change. You rely on 3 pillars, which are the same, and you get new types of bots. They now use intelligence to deal with unstructured data, new inputs, and process exceptions differently. They combine together and bring together people and bots. We call it human in the loop within WorkFusion technology. And you also use intelligent routing of tasks to right people and right bots, and have the software to manage who does what. At this point, we're ready to answer questions. I've seen a number of them raised in the Q&A panel. Anthony?
Thanks, Michael. All right, that concludes the content section of the webinar. And as Michael said, we do have a number of questions that came through in chat. So let's go ahead and dive right in. So the first question comes to us from BR, and it's a question for Craig. So Craig, one of the main issues that we face with RPA is the fact that it's a bit more expensive than mainframe automation. That clients tend to prefer that. Could you talk about sort of the cost savings of RPA versus sort of mainframe automation and what the specifics are there?
I certainly can talk about, it's interesting. I get that RPA is relatively inexpensive, but the comparison is usually with BPM and other broader process capabilities. In terms of mainframe automation, certainly there are scripts that you could run in the mainframe that would essentially do, the work of a bot, but you're not going to be able to really set up the infrastructure for managing digital workers and having control of them through a control tower and visibility and sort of the real time. You don't really have a way to kind of separate the automation in a mainframe environment to be able to manage it, to be able to grow it more intelligently in the future. But the ROI has been one of the strongest aspects of RPA because you can see it. You can take a look at Sally and Harry and kind of know what the bot's going to cost you per year and kind of know what Harry and Sally are costing. Now, we have seen some distinction in ROI in that the front office, the call center environment is getting less return on investment than the back office, and that historically is because the call centers have been metric oriented and beat up for years to get every efficiency, call hold times and so forth. So there's less inefficiency there in a sense. Well, one of the things we've also found is that and this gets sort of to the mainframe question, is that there's actually a lot of infrastructure costs for running bots that are not anticipated by customers and enterprises that are bringing them in. So if you have a bot architecture that requires a VM, virtual machine for every bot, you all of a sudden can have a cost that's almost as much or as the bot license to manage the bot from an infrastructure standpoint. And then you start to look at high availability, and now you have redundant control towers and redundant design studios and redundant VMs, and so the sort of costs of running RPA at scale are just being understood. I'll stop there.
Great, thanks, Craig. So next question comes from Janesh. The question is, how can someone who's early in sort of the RPA profession and someone who's implementing RPA, how can they stay on top of changes that are going on in the industry because it moves so fast? Michael, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for the question. We, being a technology company, also think a lot of this. And it's not just staying on top of what's happening in RPA, but also it comes to bringing not just the software, but the knowledge to the customers and partners of ours. And with this thought in mind, we opened automationacademy.com, which is a free-to-join portal where you can learn more about what is RPA, how do people do RPA today, what is AI, and how does it play into automation and RPA world. And also, you can take very specific courses on, now WorkFusion branded, how to do RPA, and that's actually a path to start early career in RPA for many people. We see this a lot among our customers and among our partners, and I would ensure that everyone who gets in gets proper attention, and we welcome you to join automationacademy.com. There's one more question, Anthony. I'm ready to take the next one. How IT infrastructure requirements and demands changing with advancement of RPA into 2.0? This is a good question and good catch. The IT infrastructure requirements would definitely change because now you bring in more capabilities. And you now bring the ability to process unstructured data and do OCR and other things you couldn't do before. You couldn't do with RPA 1.0. The thing is that you now get more components. You now get an infrastructure for cognitive automation and infrastructure for digital transformation, OCR. You still benefit a lot from those because you get into new untapped use cases before, and we also see a move towards hybrid deployments where you rely on a cloud capability to have these components to do heavy lifting when it's needed. For example, to learn on your data, to process it, or to do OCR, and then scratch everything it processed and transition back into into your on-prem deployment. Others do deploy everything on-premise whenever it comes to more sensitive data, whenever it comes to PII data and the like. And you can think of it as adding just one more layer, which is responsible for cognitive, which is just an add-on to your existing infrastructure.
Great, thanks, Michael. All right, next question is for Craig. So, Craig, in the early part of your presentation, you talked a lot about change management. Can you talk a little bit more about, this comes from John Munish and a couple others that have chimed in, so it's sort of a collaborative question. But could you talk a little bit about more that change management really is critical to get the buy-in of the workforce that you're effectively going to replace? Can you talk a little bit about how change management will grow there?
Yeah, certainly will. That's a topic that we're looking into a lot here. And I set that up a little bit with that graph that showed the today's workforce and the cubicle workforce and moving to a transitional set of work or an economy and moving ultimately, hopefully, to the digital world in terms of employment. So there's going to be a big issue here. It's kind of the elephant in the room that no one is really addressing, I think, adequately. The politicians are telling us that it's immigrants taking our jobs, but really it's going to be robots and robotic automation that's going to be taking the jobs. And so we're setting people's expectations in completely the wrong way and not addressing the problem, in my humble opinion. So what do you do about that? What does it really mean? So it means that when you bring your first bot in, you need to enlist the people that it's going to affect in the early process design, in the early decision making. You need to understand how the digital worker is going to change the career path of the individuals that it's interacting with, it's displacing. It's affecting their jobs, their roles in the organization, and you need a plan. You need you really need to bring in strategic growth or HR people that are specialists in this area. The hard thing is that when you look at the Prosky model for change management, which has been out there for years, it's an 8-step. It's almost like Alcoholics Anonymous. It's got 8 steps to it. It assumes that you know exactly what the change is going to be. So it assumes, for example, that you're going to outsource this chunk of the call center to Bangladesh. So you know what the change is, and so you can deal very specifically with the change by going through these 8 steps. This is more complicated because you don't really know how intelligent that digital worker is going to get. You don't know how much machine learning and AI and natural language processing and all of these embedded AI modules are going to actually, what level of change are they really going to make? So there's a subtlety with all of this that's really bad. So some of the good practices I've seen are the digital workers have been given, it'll sound silly, but they've been given names. In one government agency, they named it after the presidents. And Washington can be rented for 27 cents a minute. And if you do the math, that's a pretty good price for a worker. It's not free, but it's a good price. And so you can do things with naming the digital worker. You can do things with naming them after perhaps a high performer that you have. You need to get those high performers on the ground to be to take responsibility for the knowledge base, the knowledge repository. Think of them as being a cognitive sommelier. They're going to become, they're going to have a higher level job that's going to be more focused on continuous improvement of the process than actually doing the repetitive work that they were doing. Now, the unfortunate reality is that there are fewer. You're going to take your best people and you're going to make them the cognitive sommeliers, and the others you're going to probably replace and toss off. So it's still not perfect, but it's been shown that bad attitudes can just kill implementations and projects that's been going on for years. So you really have to have a communications plan. You need to involve experts. These people, there are people in HR that actually know the Prosky model. They know the basics of change management. You need to deal with the subtleties and really help them adjust it for this new world that we're in.
Thanks, Craig. So I guess one question to close is we've seen a lot of questions within the Q&A that sort of come up around from a WorkFusion perspective and how we're positioned in the industry. Could you give us a sort of a quick overview of where you see WorkFusion in the industry and what sets us apart from our competitors?
That's for me?
Yes, Craig.
Yeah, well, most of the RPA community really had different roots than WorkFusion. So they came from, working around the desktop. They came from terminal emulation or, I don't want to say screen scraping because that's offensive to many in the RPA community. And they're embracing analytics as they go because that's where the market's going. WorkFusion came at it from an analytics perspective first. So they were first trying to understand human-machine interaction and using some pretty advanced machine learning to do that. And at some point they figured, well, we're kind of assessing these problems. We'll probably make more money if we can solve them by automating them. So they came into RPA in a later stage. That wasn't the first thing they were thinking about. So I think that has some short-term disadvantages, but long-term some really good advantages in that they are the most advanced provider in terms of analytics that are doing RPA today. I think on the balance that, I think there are some elements around the core automation, around desktop automation that that they'll get to and they'll improve over time. So I think you really want to, it depends on the application that you're really trying to focus on. If it has an unstructured element, if it has the kind of things we've been talking about here, you definitely want to take a look at them. So I'll leave it there. I do have an analysis of the market, Forrester Wave in this area for those of you that are clients. That's available on our website.
Craig, I really appreciate the thoughtful and the complete answer and sort of like where from a positioning standpoint from a WorkFusion perspective. We really do appreciate that. So and again, for everybody on the webinar, we really appreciate there are a number of questions that we didn't get to, but we are going to follow up. We're going to take all the input that you guys had. We really appreciate your time today and follow up with answers to a number of those, as there were a number of really good questions that came out of the content today. Two things to remember too: you'll receive a survey once the presentation, as the webinar is concluded. So if you could fill that out to let us know what you thought, what we could do better next time, we would really appreciate that. And just to close, if you have want any more detailed information about WorkFusion's products, what we do, how we do it, what our pricing model is, please email us at learn@workfusion.com, and one of our team will be happy to reach back out to you. So with that, let's go ahead and we'll close it here for today. I want to just before we go, to thank Craig LeClaire from Forrester for all of the insight that he brought today. Craig has a wealth of knowledge within the industry, and it's great to have him on to give his perspective on this particular topic. So Craig, thank you so much for being on. And for everybody else, we'll see you on our next webinar in September. Thanks very much, and we'll talk to everybody soon.